In a heavy music scene characterized by aggressive progressions and breakdowns, mixed with often harsh vocals, Orange County's IGNITE stood out in the world of hardcore punk for their strong songwriting skills, but especially for longtime vocalist Zoltan or Zoli Teglas' tenor range voice, which was mostly an anomaly in hardcore at the turn of the millennium. The band became known for their lyrical themes related to personal struggles, politics, society, environmentalism, and Hungary, the home country of Zoli's parents, while creating a genuine, unique, and powerful mix of hardcore and melody that sounded like this. Zoli and his unique voice have been credited as one of the band's main focal points, with one of their official web bios writing that the band's records have distinguished themselves with complex arrangements, triumphant hooks, and IGNITE's calling card, frontman Zoli Teglas' unmistakable, soaring vocals. The band even gained respect outside of the hardcore and punk scenes, including by Soundgarden's Chris Cornell and Swedish metal band In Flames, among many others, with Zoli providing vocals for a wide range of bands, from the Misfits to Motorhead. But despite so much of IGNITE's identity being centered around Zoli's voice, songwriting, and stage presence, his relationship with IGNITE wasn't always so straightforward, and he left the band in 2020, being replaced by new vocalist Eli Santana a year later. In fact, even though Zoli was in the band for more than 25 years, he only featured on 4 full-length albums. But despite all of the lineup changes and long periods of lag between albums, IGNITE's releases with Zoli have been incredibly well received, critically acclaimed, and commercially successful by hardcore punk standards. So what made Zoli's relationship with the band complicated? And how were IGNITE able to overcome hardships to produce such original and classic material over the years? Hi there, I'm Joe Meyer, and this is Heavy Academia, a place for discussions about heavy metal, punk rock, and heavy music in general. And today, I want to talk about legendary melodic hardcore band IGNITE and how they were able to produce some of the most recognizable material in this genre, despite a wide range of challenges and issues, including a complicated relationship between band members, but especially with former lead singer Zoli Teglas. But more importantly, I want to bring up some bigger questions, like how much does taking extra time to write songs, focusing on other projects, and taking breaks actually help bands make more impactful and genuine music? And how does constant and extensive touring take its toll on musicians? Now, IGNITE was formed in 1993 in Orange County, California by original bassist Brett Rasmussen, who was the only original member to have remained in IGNITE throughout its history. After settling on a name and a lineup that included Joe Nelson on vocals, the band signed to German label Lost and Found Records, agreeing to release their debut album on the label with the promise of a European tour with Sick of It All and Slapshot. The final product, Scarred for Life, was released in August of 1994, but it featured 2 vocalists, with Joe Nelson having recorded some of the songs and Randy Johnson on the rest, since Joe Nelson left the band before the album's release. According to Nelson, he didn't take the band very seriously and thought of it more as a side project, though he did write some of the songs that would later feature on the album Call on My Brothers. And it was during this period of flux in 1994 that Zoli Teglas joined the band, quickly releasing a collection of EPs, including the In My Time EP on Lost and Found Records. But the band would soon sign with American label Conversion Records for their upcoming sophomore full-length. However, their old label back in Germany, Lost and Found Records, somehow got their hands on the recordings and unilaterally released the new album as Family in 1995 without paying the band. But IGNITE quickly put the label drama behind them and released many of the same songs in the US under the name Call on My Brothers in 1995, which was then re-released by Revelation Records in the year 2000. For IGNITE's first album with Zoli, much of the positive feedback was already tied to the new frontman's vocal abilities, with a review of the re-released version saying that Call on My Brothers is a very listenable hardcore album. Zoli's voice is always a highlight of IGNITE music, and the vocals on Call on My Brothers are no exception. While the album was well received in the hardcore scene, it would be IGNITE's last full-length album released in the 1990s. And when asked about the 5-year interval between Call on My Brothers and IGNITE's next album, Zoli responded that it was because they had lost a guitarist, lost a drummer, lost a guitarist, changed record labels, European Warped Tour, recording, mixing, mastering, lost guitarist, done. But despite the challenges with the band's lineup, IGNITE's next 3 albums brought them new levels of attention and success, and each album has received legendary status in the world of melodic hardcore. A Place Called Home was released in June of the year 2000 on TVT Records, a label teetering between major independent and mainstream. Even with charges by some fans that IGNITE had sold out for signing to a major label, the album really showed the band's maturity and showcased their developing skills. Their following full-length album, Our Darkest Days, released 6 years later, became one of the band's biggest breakthroughs and is often considered to be IGNITE's Watershed album, a magnum opus of sorts that masterfully combined all the best elements the band had become known for, with especially strong guitar work by Brian Balchak and Nick Hill, and vocal performances by Zoli that were almost universally praised by critics for offering a genuinely melodic touch of hardcore with deep and meaningful lyrics. Without major label backing for distribution, the album's popularity gradually spread throughout the punk rock and hardcore underground. And all of this came at a time when hardcore had become overshadowed by gothy, makeup-wearing screamo bands. The album even attracted attention from fans of heavy metal and heavy metal musicians. Veteran groove metal band Machine Head decided to cover the first 2 tracks from Our Darkest Days in 2014. According to Machine Head's Rob Flynn, they decided to cover the IGNITE songs because the band were so impressed with Our Darkest Days in 2006 that they were immediately inspired. He even said that listening to it gave him goosebumps. Despite the undeniable underground impact the album had, there's no evidence of groundbreaking album sales or chart positions or mainstream attention, ensuring that Our Darkest Days remains one of the most overlooked, influential albums in the history of 21st century punk and hardcore. But the band rode on the success of Our Darkest Days by supporting it through worldwide tours lasting well into 2009, and a 2008 live DVD. And then in 2016, IGNITE hit the scene once again with A War Against You. Even though A War Against You wasn't as influential as Our Darkest Days, it was commercially successful and garnered positive reviews. It even peaked at number 12 on the German charts in 2016, while carrying on with many of the same characteristics that made Our Darkest Days so well received, including yet another strong performance by Zoli. A War Against You, released 10 years after Our Darkest Days, was the band's 3rd album with producer Cameron Webb, and the 4th and last full-length album with Zoli Teglas, who announced he was quitting the band in 2019, after finishing a handful of remaining tour dates in early 2020. His departure left IGNITE without their longtime centerpiece, and it couldn't have come at a much worse time, as it happened right at the onset of COVID-19. So what was going on between the last 3 IGNITE albums, which saw a 6-year pause in recording followed by a 10-year pause, followed by Zoli ultimately quitting the band? While there are likely several different explanations, some of the things that stick out most are an almost constant, exhaustive touring schedule, and a significant number of side projects. According to members of the band, IGNITE's most common activity outside of recording was of course touring. In fact, Brett and Zoli both gave off the idea that heavy touring was a part of the band's identity, which of course led to significant pauses between record releases. In the early 2000s, when asked about why IGNITE had so many lineup changes between Call on My Brothers and A Place Called Home, Zoli answered that it was because people just don't like touring. We tour a lot. We tour about 6 to 7 months a year. I'm used to it. That's what I'm supposed to do. It's my job. A lot of people can't deal with it because it's too much for them, and they have girlfriends at home. IGNITE toured so vigorously in the 2000s, especially in the US and Europe, that one German magazine reported that the California-based band could be seen in Germany, quote, every few months. Some of their more prominent tours included dates with the Misfits, Bad Religion, and Pennywise. And all this touring seems to have paid off in terms of getting the band more attention. As one 2006 report detailed, IGNITE are currently killing all with their appearances at huge European fests, including with Full Force, which had 10,000 people singing along with Zoli. But even though Zoli and Brett claimed that touring was a part of the band's identity, the almost constant and heavy worldwide touring doesn't always seem to have been so welcome, especially for Zoli, who seems to have struggled with alcoholism in the early years of the band's aggressive touring. But he also struggled with the conflict between touring duties and his passion for environmental action. In fact, Zoli had been heavily involved in different environmentalist and activist organizations since before he joined IGNITE. In addition to working for Doctors Without Borders, he had been a member of the Pacific Wildlife Foundation and Sea Shepherd since 1989, with a special emphasis on rescuing pelicans. He also revealed in 2012 that, "When I'm on stage, I'm not rescuing pelicans, and I feel guilty about it. So I feel like if I'm sharing the information, then I'm doing a good thing." And this all seems to hint that, in Zoli's mind, he always had a higher purpose beyond just playing music, and constant touring and performing may have felt like more of an obstacle or burden to him than the band's impressive touring schedules would suggest. And this brings up another important point. While IGNITE often focused on touring, each of the band members also stayed busy with other projects between IGNITE albums. Around the time of the release of A Place Called Home, Zoli had been working on his main side project, Zoli Band, which was basically a melodic alternative and soft rock project that featured Brett Rasmussen on bass, and in the year 2000, they released a self-titled album on November 56 Records, a label started by Zoli himself with the sole purpose of releasing his solo work. He revealed in a 2000 interview that he was actually very serious about his side project and had plans of moving forward with it, saying that, "I want to do music for a living and it's really hard. The Zoli stuff is something I have always wanted to do and is something I would like to make a living off of. And it's not about selling out or anything. It's not hardcore, so I'm not worried about anyone calling me a sellout. It's mellow, acoustic music, you know? You can't make a living off of hardcore, but you can off of other styles of music. I want to still do hardcore because I love it." But his solo project never quite took off, and it would go through several changes, including name changes like California United and later Ocean Hills, the name under which Zoli would put out the band's second full-length album, Santa Monica, 19 years later. And just as he was preparing his departure from IGNITE, Zoli had also made plans for a world tour with Ocean Hills in 2020, but COVID-19 ended his hopes of taking the project to new heights. But while Zoli Band never took off the way Teglas had envisioned it, he was also part of some impressive and much more well-known projects between IGNITE albums, including providing vocals for the Misfits in the year 2000 for their Canada tour, after current vocalist at the time Michael Graves was left behind. And while Brett Rasmussen went on to join Nations of Fire with IGNITE guitarist Nick Hill and members of Rise Against and Death by Stereo, and drummer Craig Anderson joined hardcore veterans Strife, Zoli would go on to join legendary skate punk band Pennywise in 2009 for a one-off tour after the departure of their longtime vocalist Jim Lindberg. But in 2010, Pennywise announced Zoli as their new permanent frontman, and together they put out the album All or Nothing in 2012. But Zoli's tenure as Pennywise frontman was contentious at best, and he left the band just a few months after the release of All or Nothing. Most of the tension seems to have come between Zoli and Pennywise's outspoken guitarist Fletcher. While IGNITE and Pennywise had toured together before and knew each other from previous contacts, they never worked together or collaborated before, and Zoli and Fletcher butted heads from the very beginning. According to Zoli, he was happy with the music they were able to produce, even if the writing process was unpleasant for him. When asked by an interviewer about what the recording experience for All or Nothing was like, he responded with, "I don't know if you've ever been in a studio with Fletcher, but it's like having root canal treatment and then someone throwing ice water on the tooth, day after day after day. But at the end of it all, I think we came out with a pretty good record." For his part, Fletcher described Zoli as stubborn and hard-headed, revealing that it was bad enough with Jim, but it's really bad right now with Zoli, because he's really strong-headed. That's what we need though. That's helping us push and drive harder than we have in years. Despite the backhanded compliments, things came to a head in the summer of 2012, as Pennywise were touring through Europe in support of All or Nothing. After having experienced back pain during much of the tour, Zoli finally collapsed on stage at With Full Force Festival in Germany and had to go to the emergency room. It was later revealed that he had a herniated disc and needed emergency surgery, or else he ran the risk of becoming paralyzed. Pennywise were forced to cancel the remaining tour dates, and by October of the same year, Jim Lindberg was back in Pennywise. Now, it should be mentioned that while fronting Pennywise, Zoli never quit IGNITE and still considered himself to be a member. Brett Rasmussen also seems to have been pretty supportive of Zoli's time with Pennywise, expressing that IGNITE was happy to share their lead singer, saying that, "We really think that Zoli playing Pennywise is a great thing. Not only for Pennywise, but also for IGNITE. It's great to know that Pennywise will continue to release CDs and tour, because I'm a fan of Pennywise, and I think that their latest album, All or Nothing, is a really amazing record. It's also great that IGNITE is getting a lot of new Pennywise fans because of the fact that Zoli is singing with them. I think it's a great situation for both bands." But despite the claims of support, IGNITE did not wait for Zoli to return, and they went on tour in 2012 with the late John Bunch of Sensefield and Further Seems Forever, having him replace Zoli on vocals. After the tumultuous Zoli with Pennywise experiment, he returned to IGNITE in 2013, and already by 2014, they began writing and recording for A War Against You. And while the album was well received musically, one of its most significant aspects was that it seemed to serve as evidence of the band's longevity and resilience, showing the world that IGNITE could go through ups and downs for years and still produce genuine, impactful material. But despite A War Against You marking a triumphant comeback for IGNITE with Zoli, it was not to last. The longtime vocalist and most recognizable part of the band announced his departure from IGNITE in 2019, giving fans a farewell message that said, "With a heavy heart, I am announcing my departure from IGNITE. I'm going to focus most of my time now to rescuing animals and other film and musical endeavors." While the announcement of his departure was a shock and disappointment to many longtime fans, in hindsight, there were several signs that it was coming. Around the time of his departure, not only did Zoli begin focusing his efforts on Zoli Band, now called Ocean Hills, and an acting career that saw him get a small part in the film Terminator Dark Fate, but he continued with the environmentalist efforts that he had been a part of for more than 3 decades. In 2024, a CBS Evening News bit on pelicans in crisis focused on the problem of the seabird's growing endangerment by starvation. The news piece featured Zoli catching and rescuing pelicans, saying, "I'm like the ambulance, the first line, the EMT for the troubled pelicans." Having expressed all the way back in 2000 that he felt relentless touring got in the way of his environmentalist goals, Zoli seems to have finally found the peace and time that he needed to focus his effort on his truest and oldest passion. And IGNITE, for their part, did prove to be resilient, with Nick Hill, who performed guitars on Our Darkest Days, returning to the band, and Eli Santana taking up vocal duties for a new self-titled album released in 2022. And while Zoli left huge shoes to fill, IGNITE's self-titled album with Eli Santana has been well received, and the band quickly returned to their second most recognizable feature after Zoli: extensive touring throughout the world. Between 1995 and 2020, Zoli Teglas was an inseparable part of hardcore band IGNITE, and with long pauses between records and multiple side projects, this period of IGNITE, on the surface, appears to have all the features of a dysfunctional band. However, there is no significant evidence that there was any kind of tension between Zoli, Brett, and the rest of the band. And, despite the long pauses, each of the albums to feature Zoli on vocals were impactful and successful in their own right, and have each been solidified as important pieces of the history of melodic hardcore. So I'll leave the conclusion up to you. How do you think the long, relentless touring and distraction of different projects impacted IGNITE with Zoli? Did it hamper the band's progress? Or did all the time in between albums actually help make them what they were? Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time here on Heavy Academia.